July 14, 1943, northern Italy near Messina. The P-47 Thunderbolt lay half buried in the Sicilian soil, its propeller bent and twisted, smoke still rising from the engine cowling. The American fighter had come down hard after taking flak over a German supply depot, carving a trench through an olive grove before coming to rest. Lieutenant James Keller had barely managed to get clear before flames engulfed the cockpit. Now he sat propped against the trunk of an ancient olive tree, watching German soldiers approach cautiously. His right leg was clearly broken, and blood seeped through the hastily applied field dressing on his shoulder. "Get the Oberleutnant Schiller," one soldier called. "This one's alive." What happened over the next 72 hours would challenge everything Keller thought he knew about the enemy. The Germans didn't execute him on sight, as rumors among American airmen had suggested they might. Instead, a field medic immediately began treating his wounds with professional efficiency. "You are fortunate," the medic said, in surprisingly good English. "The artery is undamaged." Keller said nothing, offering only name, rank, and serial number as required by the Geneva Convention. The medic smiled slightly. Yes, we will have time for that later." Oberleutnant Schiller arrived as they were loading Keller onto a stretcher. Unlike the other Germans in their dusty field gray uniforms, Schiller wore the blue-gray of the Luftwaffe with pilot's wings prominently displayed on his breast. He dismissed the infantry soldiers and knelt beside Keller. "One pilot to another," he said in accented but fluent English. "How was she handling before you went down?" The question caught Keller off guard. Professional curiosity from one flyer to another wasn't what he expected from the enemy. "Heavy on the stick," Keller found himself answering, despite his intention to remain silent. "Took flak in the hydraulics." Schiller nodded with understanding. "The Thunderbolt is a beast, yes? Much heavier than our fighters." This simple acknowledgement of their shared profession, the universal brotherhood of pilots, created an unexpected connection. As they transported Keller to a field hospital, Schiller walked alongside, asking technical questions about the P-47 that seemed driven by professional interest rather than intelligence gathering. Keller maintained his guard, but found the conversation strangely comforting amid the pain and shock of his situation. The German field hospital was a revelation. Despite being a forward unit near the contested Sicilian front, it was efficiently organized and surprisingly well equipped. The German doctor who set Keller's leg worked with practiced precision. "American?" the doctor asked as he examined the wound. "Yes," Keller replied cautiously. "Good bones," the doctor commented. "Clean break. You will fly again." That simple prognosis, delivered as a professional certainty rather than an interrogation tactic, further confused Keller's understanding of his captors. Over the next week, as Allied forces pushed deeper into Sicily, Keller was moved northward with other wounded to prevent his recapture. Oberleutnant Schiller appeared regularly, bringing small comforts: American cigarettes, a candy bar, once even a paperback novel in English. "We are not monsters," Schiller explained, when Keller questioned the kindness. "I was shot down over England in '40. The RAF pilots visited me in hospital. We are enemies, yes, but we are also airmen." This concept, that professional respect could transcend national enmity, was entirely absent from the briefings Keller had received about the enemy. By early August, Keller found himself in a proper hospital in northern Italy. His care remained surprisingly good, despite shortages affecting even German personnel. He observed how the German medical system functioned under pressure, noting both its efficiency and its limitations. "We prioritize returning men to duty," a German nurse explained, when Keller commented on the intensive physical therapy he received despite being a prisoner. "It is the same for everyone." This pragmatic approach impressed Keller, who had seen the sometimes haphazard organization of American field hospitals. It was at this northern facility that Keller first encountered other Allied prisoners. Most were British, captured during the North African campaign. Their perspective stunned him. "The Germans run a proper show," one RAF flight lieutenant told him. "Professional soldiers, not like the Italians, complete chaos with them." Another added, "The Luftwaffe boys treat us decently, soldier to soldier, you know? It's the SS you've got to watch for." This contradicted the uniform portrayal of Germans in American propaganda. Keller had been shown films depicting all Germans as fanatical Nazis. Yet here were British officers who had been prisoners for years describing a more complex reality. "The average German soldier is just like us," the flight lieutenant explained, "following orders, trying to survive. The political boys are another matter entirely." Oberleutnant Schiller continued his visits, now bringing technical manuals and aviation magazines. Their conversations grew longer, evolving from basic pilot talk to discussions of aircraft design philosophy. Schiller had flown Messerschmitt Bf-109s during the Battle of Britain and now flew the FW-190. His insights into German fighter tactics fascinated Keller. "We developed energy fighting techniques out of necessity," Schiller explained. "Your P-47 is heavier, faster in a dive. Our aircraft must use vertical maneuvers, maintaining energy." In mid-September, as Italy surrendered to the Allies, chaos erupted. The hospital was hastily evacuated northward. In the confusion, the British prisoners were separated from Keller. Schiller appeared during the night, now wearing a combat uniform rather than his dress blues. "You have a choice," he told Keller. "The SS is taking control of prisoner transfers. I can help you reach Switzerland, or you can come north with us into Germany." The offer was unexpected. Escape to Switzerland meant freedom, eventual repatriation. Yet Keller hesitated. His leg had healed, but remained weak. The journey would be dangerous. More significantly, Schiller's warning about the SS matched what the British prisoners had told him. "Why would you help me escape?" Keller asked. Schiller's answer was simple. "Because you are a pilot. What happens next in Italy will not be honorable warfare." Keller made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He chose to remain with Schiller, to be transferred to Germany as a prisoner rather than risk the uncertain path to Switzerland. What he didn't fully grasp was how this choice would be perceived by both sides, by the Americans as potential desertion, by the Germans as a first step towards something unprecedented. The journey to Germany took 2 weeks through the chaos of a collapsing Italian front. Keller witnessed the German military machine in retreat, still disciplined but strained by fuel shortages and Allied air superiority. The very aircraft he had flown now dominated the skies, P-47s and P-38s strafing German columns almost at will. Schiller, who had been assigned to escort the hospital transport, watched the American aircraft with professional admiration. "Your industry is remarkable," he commented one evening as they sheltered from an air raid. "We see the same aircraft types again and again. Each one we shoot down is replaced by 2 more." Keller found himself explaining American production methods. "The P-47 is designed for mass production, standardized parts, assembly line manufacturing. Republic Aviation turned out over 300 last month from a single factory." Schiller nodded grimly. Our Focke-Wulf plant was bombed 3 times this year. Production never exceeds 200 per month across all factories. This simple exchange revealed the fundamental disparity Keller had never fully appreciated. Germany was fighting with limited resources against America's overwhelming industrial might. By October 1943, Keller arrived at Luftwaffe Interrogation Center in Frankfurt. He expected harsh questioning, perhaps torture. Instead, he found himself in conversation with Luftwaffe intelligence officers who were primarily interested in technical details about American aircraft. Information Keller knew would be obsolete by the time it could be implemented. What surprised him was their approach. Unlike the Hollywood depiction of German interrogators, these were aviation experts engaging in technical discussions. "Your P-47's R-2800 engine is quite remarkable," one officer commented while examining photographs. 4,500 pounds of thrust. Our BMW 801 produces only 3,800. Another added, "The turbocharger system is particularly interesting. We've struggled with high-altitude performance." Their questions revealed both professional curiosity and a concerning truth. German engineering understood the principles, but lacked the materials and production capacity to match American output. In November, Keller was transferred to Stalag Luft III, the dedicated prison camp for Allied airmen. There he encountered the broader American POW community for the first time since his capture. Their reception was mixed. Some accepted him readily, others were suspicious of his extended time with German officers. "Schiller is just pumping you for intel," one American captain warned. "That's how they work. Buddy up to you, make you drop your guard." But Keller had seen enough to form his own assessments. The contrast between American assumptions and his personal experience created cognitive dissonance he struggled to reconcile. The Germans he'd encountered weren't the fanatical monsters of propaganda films. They were professional soldiers fighting for their country, just as he had been. This realization didn't make them right, but it made them human, a distinction that would prove crucial in what followed. Life at Stalag Luft III provided further education. The camp was run according to the Geneva Convention, with the Luftwaffe maintaining professional standards despite increasing shortages. Keller observed the German guards closely, noting their discipline even as their uniforms became increasingly threadbare. "They're running out of everything," a longtime prisoner explained. "Look at their boots, resoled multiple times. Their uniforms are patched, but they still maintain the structure." What struck Keller most was the respect shown between Luftwaffe guards and Allied airmen. A mutual recognition existed. They had fought the same war from opposite sides of the sky. This stood in stark contrast to how Wehrmacht prisoners were treated by some American guards, based on stories he'd heard before deployment. The professional courtesy extended by the Luftwaffe, even in Germany's increasingly desperate situation, challenged Keller's understanding of the enemy. In January 1944, the camp received news of American bombing raids reaching deeper into Germany. The guards' reactions were not anger, but a grim fatalism. "They know they're losing," an RAF officer told Keller. "The smart ones are already thinking about what comes after." This perspective was reinforced when Oberleutnant Schiller unexpectedly visited the camp on official business. He sought out Keller, now walking with only a slight limp, and they spoke privately with a guard, present but distant. "The war is lost for Germany," Schiller said quietly. "Not tomorrow, not next month, but it is lost. The question becomes what remains afterward." Keller was shocked by this admission from a German officer. "Why tell me this?" he asked. Schiller's answer was cryptic. "Because some of us are thinking beyond the Reich. When this ends, Germany will need bridges to the west. This conversation, seemingly insignificant, planted a seed that would grow in unexpected ways. February brought increased bombing and decreased rations. The camp became colder, both in temperature and mood. Escape committees worked constantly, but Keller remained apart from these efforts. His status remained ambiguous. His extended time with German officers before arriving at the camp created lingering suspicion among some prisoners. This isolation gave him time to observe and reflect. He noticed how the German system functioned despite catastrophic pressure. The discipline, the order, the attention to detail, even as the war situation deteriorated. In March, Schiller returned with an extraordinary proposal. Meeting Keller under the pretense of a routine interrogation, he outlined a plan so unexpected that Keller initially thought it was a trap. There are officers within the Luftwaffe who recognize Germany's defeat is inevitable, Schiller explained. They are preparing for what comes after, when Russia and the Western Allies meet. Some believe Germany's future lies with the West, not under Soviet control. The proposal was unprecedented. Keller would be offered a position as a technical advisor to a Luftwaffe engineering group, ostensibly to help improve German aircraft performance against American bombers. In reality, he would be establishing connections with German officers, planning for post-war collaboration with the West. "This is treason against your country," Keller pointed out. Schiller shook his head. "This is looking beyond current enmity to prevent greater catastrophe. Russia will not stop at Berlin." Keller requested time to consider this outlandish proposal. The moral complexity was overwhelming. Working with the enemy, even with an eye toward post-war relations, violated his oath as an American officer. Yet he had seen enough to recognize that Schiller's assessment of the coming Soviet threat held truth. The simplistic view of Germans he'd held before being shot down had been replaced by a more nuanced understanding. Some were indeed Nazi fanatics. Others were professional soldiers increasingly concerned about their country's future. In April 1944, following a week of deliberation, Keller made the most difficult decision of his life. He agreed to Schiller's proposal with specific conditions. He would provide only technical information already known to the Germans. He would not directly contribute to combat operations. And most importantly, he would establish communication channels with specific German officers willing to cooperate with Western allies against anticipated Soviet expansion. This decision would be viewed as treason by American authorities if discovered. Keller understood this, yet he had come to believe that the greater service to his country might lie in building relationships with German military professionals who would be crucial in the post-war order. This calculation, made in the isolated confines of a prison camp with limited information, would have profound consequences. Keller was transferred to a Luftwaffe technical facility near Munich under the cover story that his engineering knowledge was being exploited for German aircraft development. In reality, he became part of a small network of German officers preparing for Germany's defeat. He observed firsthand the disconnect between German technological innovation and production limitations. "Your designs are often superior," he told a German engineer examining a captured P-51 Mustang. "But your manufacturing can't match our volume." The engineer nodded grimly. "This Mustang has simplicity we can't achieve. We design for performance. You design for production. One factory in America makes more fighters in a month than all our plants combined." This fundamental difference in approach, German craftsmanship versus American mass production, explained much about the air war's trajectory. German pilots flew exceptional aircraft, but had too few of them against the Allied tide. By June 1944, as Allied forces landed in Normandy, Keller's position became increasingly precarious. His German contacts grew more desperate to establish post-war connections, while the risk of being identified as a collaborator by either side intensified. He walked a tightrope, providing minimal technical assistance while gathering names and details of German officers opposed to both Nazi leadership and potential Soviet occupation. The technical work itself was fascinating, despite the moral complexity. German jet development had surpassed American efforts, with the Me-262 already operational while American jets remained experimental. "This engine design is 2 years ahead of anything we have," Keller admitted while examining blueprints. The German engineer smiled sadly. "And yet we can build perhaps 20 per month, while your factories produce hundreds of piston engines weekly. Advanced technology means little without production capacity." In August 1944, as Paris was liberated, security around the facility tightened. Nazi Party officials began appearing more frequently, monitoring technical programs with increasing scrutiny. Schiller warned Keller that their arrangement was under suspicion. "The SS is taking control of special projects," he explained during a hurried meeting. "Your presence will soon be questioned. We must formalize your status." The formalization Schiller proposed was astonishing. Keller would be officially registered as a technical consultant with honorary Luftwaffe status. This unprecedented arrangement would provide cover against SS interference, but would also constitute a documented case of an American officer working for German military research. "This crosses a line I cannot uncross," Keller objected. Schiller's response was blunt. "The alternative is transfer to SS custody. They are not known for respecting the Geneva Convention." Faced with this choice, Keller agreed to the formal arrangement. Documents were created showing him as Technical Advisor Keller, attached to Luftwaffe Research Group 7, with the honorary rank of Sonderführer, Z, a civilian specialist rank used for technical experts. His signature on these papers, while obtained under duress, would later be presented as evidence of willing collaboration. By October 1944, Allied bombing had reached Munich itself. The research facility relocated to a former salt mine in Bavaria, part of the desperate German effort to protect critical research from air attack. Working underground in these surreal conditions, Keller continued his precarious balancing act. He provided enough technical input to maintain his cover, while focusing primarily on identifying German officers who could serve as Western allies in the post-war landscape. The research group's work increasingly focused on last-ditch technologies, rocket-assisted takeoff systems, simplified jet designs that could be manufactured in dispersed facilities, even underground runways concealed from Allied reconnaissance. The desperation was palpable. "These are not viable solutions," a German engineer confessed after a particularly demanding design session. "These are fantasies to please leaders who refuse to accept reality." In December 1944, as German forces launched the surprise Ardennes offensive, Keller's situation deteriorated further. Nazi Party oversight intensified, with political officers questioning his role more aggressively. Schiller's protection became less effective as the Luftwaffe itself fell under suspicion following the failure of promised air support for ground operations. "We are running out of time," Schiller warned during a rare private moment. "When the collapse comes, you must have documentation proving your true purpose." This led to their most dangerous activity, creating and hiding records of German officers willing to assist Western forces, including technical data they could provide. These documents, concealed within the facility's ventilation system, would serve dual purposes: evidence to protect these officers from war crimes charges and proof of Keller's actual motives if he faced treason allegations. January 1945 brought heavy snow and increasing despair among the German staff. Fuel shortages meant testing had virtually ceased. Engineers designed aircraft that would never be built, yet the research continued under increasingly surreal conditions. Detailed work on projects everyone knew would never reach production. Keller found himself respected by the German engineers, who valued his practical American perspective amid their increasingly theoretical exercises. "Your approach is refreshing," the lead designer commented, after Keller suggested simplifying a complicated fuel system. "Germans often make perfect the enemy of functional. Perhaps this is why we are losing." This simple observation captured much about the different engineering philosophies. German precision versus American pragmatism played out in their aircraft designs just as it did in their industrial approach, and with similar results. In February, Schiller arrived with disturbing news. "You've been identified in an SS report as a potential spy rather than a collaborative prisoner. They are preparing to transfer you to security forces for enhanced interrogation." The euphemism's meaning was clear. Keller's precarious position had finally collapsed. Schiller outlined the only remaining option. Keller would have to fully embrace his cover identity, accepting formal Luftwaffe assignment to protect him from SS jurisdiction. This final step, actually wearing a German uniform, represented an irreversible crossing of the line. "This is treason by any definition," Keller argued during their tense discussion. "The uniform makes it absolute." Schiller's response cut through Keller's moral objections. "Your government will judge your actions by their results, not their appearance. If you deliver a network of cooperative German officers and technical data after the war, they will understand the necessity. If you die under SS interrogation, you accomplish nothing." With profound reluctance, Keller accepted the Luftwaffe uniform and documentation as Sonderführer Keller, technically a civilian specialist with officer equivalency rather than a commissioned officer. This legal distinction, while meaningful in German military law, would likely mean little to American authorities. Photographs were taken for his new identification papers, images that would eventually become evidence in military court. By March 1945, American forces were approaching Bavaria. The research facility prepared for evacuation deeper into the Alpine Redoubt, where Nazi leadership envisioned a final stand. Schiller and Keller implemented their contingency plan. They would remain behind with a small technical team, ostensibly to destroy sensitive documents, but actually to prepare for contact with advancing American forces. As German units retreated eastward, Keller experienced the surreal position of wearing enemy uniform while preparing to greet his countrymen. The documentation they had prepared was organized and hidden in a location only they knew. Insurance against both American suspicion and Nazi retribution. "When the Americans arrive," Schiller instructed, "you must immediately identify yourself and request contact with intelligence officers, not regular military police." April brought the sound of American artillery growing closer daily. The remaining German staff grew increasingly desperate, some destroying their identification documents and Nazi party badges, others clinging to delusions of secret weapons that would reverse the war. Keller watched this disintegration with complex emotions: sympathy for the engineers who had treated him as a colleague, satisfaction at Germany's defeat, and growing anxiety about his own precarious position. On April 29, 1945, American forces reached the facility. Keller, still in German uniform, surrendered immediately, identifying himself in English as Lieutenant James Keller, United States Army Air Forces, service number 0734529. The soldiers, understandably suspicious of an American in German uniform, placed him under arrest. Schiller and the other Germans were processed as standard prisoners, separated from Keller, who was now treated as a potential collaborator. The interrogation that followed was intense. Military intelligence officers questioned Keller for days, skeptical of his explanation. "You expect us to believe you wore that uniform as some kind of deep cover operation?" one captain asked incredulously. "Without orders, without authorization, completely on your own initiative?" Keller could only respond with the truth. "I made the best decision I could with limited options. The documentation we secured will prove valuable." It took 2 weeks for intelligence officers to locate and verify the hidden documentation. The materials, detailed technical information on German jet development, names of German officers willing to cooperate with Western forces, and evidence of early SS plans to destroy research rather than let it fall into Allied hands, proved substantial. Particularly valuable were details about German scientists and engineers who might otherwise have been recruited by the Soviet Union. By mid-May, as Germany surrendered unconditionally, Keller's status remained ambiguous. He was neither fully cleared nor formally charged, held in a secured facility while higher authorities determined his fate. Schiller and the other German officers were separately detained, their connection to Keller's case under investigation. In June 1945, as the immediate chaos of victory subsided, emerging tensions with the Soviet Union began influencing how American authorities viewed Keller's actions. His documentation of German officers opposed to communism and willing to work with Western forces suddenly aligned with evolving American interests. What had been potential treason in wartime was being reassessed as forward-thinking in the emerging Cold War context. A closed military hearing was convened in July to determine Keller's status. He faced potential court-martial for collaborating with the enemy, wearing an enemy uniform and failing to escape when opportunities might have existed. His defense rested entirely on the intelligence value of his actions. Lieutenant Keller appears to have made an unauthorized decision to gather intelligence while maintaining a cover that required enemy uniform, the presiding officer summarized. The question before us is whether the value of that intelligence outweighs the irregular nature of his actions. After 3 days of testimony, including statements from intelligence officers now using Keller's network of German contacts, the panel reached a classified decision. Keller would receive neither punishment nor commendation. His record would show he was captured and detained under special circumstances until liberation. He would be prohibited from discussing his experience and would be separated from service with an honorable discharge and return to civilian status. This ambiguous resolution reflected the transitional period between World War II and the Cold War. Actions that seemed clearly treasonous under wartime thinking were being reevaluated through the lens of emerging Soviet-American competition. Keller had inadvertently positioned himself at this inflection point. By September 1945, Keller had returned to civilian life in Pennsylvania, prohibited from discussing his wartime experience and carrying the psychological burden of his choices. He found work as an aircraft engineer at a commercial manufacturer. His military experience noted only as flight and technical duties in the European theater. Meanwhile, Oberleutnant Schiller and several other German officers from Keller's network entered the American military intelligence system. Their knowledge of German technical developments and Soviet intentions proved valuable as tensions increased. Some eventually received positions in West German defense establishments as that nation was rebuilt as a Cold War ally. In 1948, as the Berlin blockade crystallized East-West tensions, Keller received an unexpected visitor. A man in civilian clothes arrived at his modest home, identifying himself as Colonel Harrison from Army Intelligence. "Your German network has proved quite valuable," Harrison explained without preamble, "particularly regarding Soviet recruitment of German scientists. The Pentagon has reassessed your actions in light of current circumstances." This reassessment didn't change Keller's official record, but it brought a classified letter of commendation and a return to reserve status with promotion to captain. Tangible acknowledgement that the moral complexity of his decisions was being viewed differently as the world changed. What seemed questionable in 1945 looks prescient in 1948, Harrison explained. "You identified the next conflict before most of us recognized it." In 1952, during the height of the Korean War, Keller was quietly contacted to assist with technical assessment of Soviet aircraft technology, much of which derived from German designs he had worked with. His unique experience made him valuable as American forces encountered MiG-15 jets with clear Luftwaffe design heritage. The technical knowledge he had gained while wearing a German uniform now served American national security interests. Schiller, now working for the developing West German Defense Ministry under close American supervision, maintained cautious contact with Keller through authorized channels. Their unique shared experience, an American who had worn German uniform and a German now working under American direction, gave them perspective few others possessed. "History has made our unusual arrangement seem wise in retrospect," Schiller wrote in a carefully worded letter cleared by both governments. "What was once betrayal is now alliance." By 1955, as West Germany joined NATO, Keller's story remained classified, but his expertise was increasingly valued. He consulted on joint American-German aircraft projects, his understanding of both nations' engineering approaches proving useful in the new collaborative environment. The moral ambiguity of his wartime choices faded as the Cold War framework solidified. Germany was now ally, Russia the adversary, exactly as he and Schiller had anticipated in those desperate discussions of 1944. In 1960, Keller attended an aviation conference in Munich, his first return to Germany since the war. The country had transformed from ruins to economic powerhouse. Former adversaries were now partners. At a reception, he encountered several German engineers he had worked with during his unusual captivity. Their reunion was complex, acknowledgement of shared experience without celebrating the circumstances that created it. "You understood before most what would come after the war," one former Luftwaffe designer told him privately. "While we were designing aircraft that would never fly, you were building relationships that would matter after the fighting." This perspective, that Keller's morally ambiguous choice had been validated by history, offered some comfort for the psychological burden he still carried. In 1965, as American involvement in Vietnam escalated, Keller found himself increasingly troubled by parallels he observed. "We're making the same mistake Germany made," he confided to Schiller during a NATO consultation. "Fighting with superior technology, but insufficient understanding of the environment." His unique perspective, having seen German defeat from the inside, gave him insights few American planners possessed. By 1970, the classified nature of Keller's wartime experience was gradually relaxed as the events receded into history. A carefully sanitized version appeared in a military history journal. presenting his case as an example of unconventional intelligence gathering. The moral complexity was acknowledged but framed within Cold War imperatives. Lieutenant Keller's actions, while unorthodox, secured valuable intelligence and established relationships that proved critical in the post-war security environment. In 1975, 30 years after the war's end, Keller gave his first public interview about his experience. By then, his case had been formally reviewed and officially recognized as irregular but ultimately beneficial to national security interests. The interviewer, writing for an aviation history publication, asked the inevitable question, "Do you regret wearing the enemy uniform?" Keller's response revealed the complexity he still carried. "I regret the necessity that led to that choice. I regret that circumstances forced a decision between clear moral principles and practical realities. But I don't regret the relationships that choice allowed me to build, relationships that helped both nations in the aftermath." By the 1980s, Keller had become an elder statesman in aviation circles, respected for his technical knowledge and unique historical perspective. He occasionally lectured at military academies on the ethical complexities of warfare, using his own experience as a case study in how moral clarity can be challenged by operational realities. "The simple patriotism I took into combat became something more complicated after I was shot down," he told cadets. "I learned that enemies are human, that nations are complex, and that right actions aren't always clearly marked." In 1989, as the Berlin Wall fell, Keller watched on television with profound emotion. The division of Germany that he and Schiller had discussed in those desperate wartime conversations was ending peacefully. The Cold War framework that had retrospectively justified his morally ambiguous choices was itself disappearing. History had moved beyond the circumstances that defined his life's most difficult decision. Schiller, now retired from the West German Defense Ministry, called Keller that night. "We were right about some things and wrong about others," he said simply. "But the work we did helped build this moment." This perspective, that their unusual cooperation had contributed in some small way to the peaceful resolution of the Cold War, offered final validation of the choice Keller had made in that desperate spring of 1944. In 1995, 50 years after the war's end, the full documentation of Keller's case was declassified. Military historians reassessed his actions in the context of early Cold War intelligence operations. What emerged was a nuanced understanding. Keller had technically violated his oath as an officer by wearing enemy uniform, but his actions had secured valuable intelligence and relationships that proved important in the post-war order. A historian interviewing Keller for an academic publication asked what lesson should be drawn from his experience. His answer reflected a lifetime of reflection. The moral complexity of warfare doesn't fit neatly into training manuals. I went into war believing in absolute right and wrong. I emerged understanding that good men can make difficult choices in impossible situations. The uniform I wore matters less than the relationships I built and the information I secured. Keller died in 2001 at age 81, his unique wartime experience having carried him from clear moral certainty through profound ambiguity to a hard-earned wisdom about the complexity of human conflict. His obituary in the New York Times described him as a pilot who crashed into enemy territory and made the extraordinary choice to work within enemy ranks, a decision once viewed as potential treason that later came to be seen as prescient intelligence gathering as the Cold War emerged. The American pilot who had worn Luftwaffe uniform was buried with full military honors. his flag-draped coffin, acknowledging that history had ultimately judged his unorthodox service as valuable to his nation. Among the mourners was an elderly German man, Schiller, making a final journey to honor the unusual bond they had formed across enemy lines. As he placed a small Luftwaffe pilot's badge alongside the American flowers, he whispered, "We flew different flags, but we saw the same future." The story of Lieutenant James Keller, the American pilot who crashed on enemy lines and made the extraordinary choice to work within their military, remains a case study in the moral complexity of warfare, the ambiguity of patriotism in rapidly changing circumstances, and how history's judgment can transform understanding of actions once considered beyond acceptance. His experience demonstrates that in the chaos of war, the clear lines of training and expectation can blur into difficult choices where right and wrong become matters of perspective, timing, and consequence rather than absolute principles. What began as a routine mission over Sicily in July 1943 became a journey through the moral borderlands of modern warfare, a journey that challenged definitions of loyalty, service, and ultimately wisdom as the world transformed from global war to Cold War and beyond. In that transformation, an American in German uniform became not a traitor, but a reluctant pioneer in the complex intelligence relationships that would define the decades to follow.